Hey, welcome back. Been a couple of weeks, but we're now a little bit more settled into the new container. Just have a little shufty down there. You can see we've got a couple of workbenches here now, and still tools everywhere, but all good. A lot better here, a lot quieter. For Phil down in New Zealand, I've got no one walking around on high heels around here now. So today, not going to be too long a one. I'm going to show you, we've took the carbs off the XS because we need to have a look and see how blocked they were. I have taken them apart, but I'm going to show you basically all the components or whatever. If you've never taken them apart before, we'll take it from there. Here we go. Okay, this might be a little bit difficult to see, but I just thought I'd show you sort of thing that I use for. Now this is only solder, but I use it for just making sure the jets aren't blocked. I normally have some oxyacetylene nozzle cleaners. There's some really fine ones which you can get to clean nozzles out of oxyacetylene burners. But unfortunately they seem to have got lost over the years, so I need to buy another pair. But a little bit of solder, very don't snap the solder inside or anything, or it's going to cause you loads of problems. Or some very thin electrical strands from cable will do it. The smaller the jet, as you can see with these, that will not work. Won't go all the way through. So you have to try and use something else. I must admit though, some of these the jets are only always getting sucked in from this end. And to be honest, a lot of the time, if you soak them in a little bit of solvent and then blow some compressed air out the opposite way, it does get rid of if any of them are blocked. These haven't been too bad. There was some gunge in the pilot air screws, which could be the problem why the bike wouldn't tick over. So basically, we've worked our way through and just cleaned all the jets, and then we'll put it all back together and see how we get on. Hopefully, the bike will just tick over, and all will be good. Most of these, the XS1100 carbs, XS650 I think, and XS750s, it's all the same carbs, just have different size jets. When we took this apart, we didn't have not a problem with the diaphragms or anything. However, the float bowls, the screw that stops the fuel from coming out the bottom, which is that one. See the little pin, sort of tapered pin on the end, which actually closes up, stops the fuel from coming out, and there's normally a little rubber seal that sits on the outside of that as well. 3 of them were mashed. I couldn't actually drain the carbs out with the old fluid originally. I had to take the bowls off because they just wouldn't come undone. We have succeeded in getting 2 of the screws out. One came out by itself. The second one we've got out completely using an easy out, which is basically, I don't know whether you can see this, but you drill a hole down the centre of the grub screw or the bolt, and then you put a left-hand thread tool in. So as you're winding it in left-hand thread, once it grips, it carries on and winds the grub screw back out because the grub screw is right-hand thread. That worked on one of them. So we had 2 float bowls sorted. The third one hasn't gone as well. I don't know whether you can see that, but we might still be able to salvage that. I've just got to be really careful. I haven't got the pillar drill here at the moment. I'm going to get the pillar drill and try and go down the centre with a very fine drill bit and collapse it so I don't damage the thread inside. However, the fourth one shattered. So I've got to find at least one right hand float bowl. That's the other thing. The float bowls are handed, as in there's 2 left hand float bowls, 2 right hand float bowls. If you see, like, they sit that way, so 2 of them will be like that, 2 of them will be the other way. Hence the reason being, and I'm sure it's mainly, all it's for is so the drain, so that you can get the 2 screws on one side of the bike, 2 screws on the other side of the bike to be able to actually drain the fuel whenever. So this one's shattered. Fortunately, the easy out seemed to be working. It started to grip, and unfortunately it shattered the casting. So I've got to find at least one of those. But apart from that, some carb cleaner, give them a good clean, because the bike was running, but it was only running on the choke, which I'm sure you won't know where the choke is, but for anyone who doesn't, that, on this bike, that's the choke. That basically restricts some of the airflow, lets a bit more fuel in. You can see off that way, there's a little valve there on each carb. When you pull that lever, it's opening that up, which normally, I'm not going to take these apart completely. You can take all the carbs individually apart. If you do, though, you have to start setting up all the springs again to open to get all the valves set up. I'd sooner just clean them up, make sure they're okay, put them all back together, and they do need a good clean as well around here and everything, but I can do that with a brush. If it's, you know, if it's working, then it's not worth fixing it, because you can start tampering it and things could go wrong. On the diaphragms, if you ever have to buy new diaphragm with the cylinder, it's most probably easier to buy them. It's a bit dearer, but it's less fiddly, and they're already made up with the tab there, that little tab set in the right place with the hole to go to the front of the on the inlet side. But if you ever need to replace this pin, sometimes they get bent, but if you bought a new set of diaphragms, you to change them, all it is there's a tiny little circlip inside, and there's a notch in the pin, which basically some small circlip pliers pull the circlip inwards, take it out, your pin will come out, and fitting them back in is the reverse. Simple as that. So make sure the rubber is sat in there properly, nice, and sometimes worth putting it on, put the cover on, just so it's nice and flat. Then pop your spring in, recess, spring sits on the recess like so, pop that into place. A couple of bolts in diagonally. You don't have to tighten them up completely. My fingers are always too big for this. So don't tighten them up, just give them just so that they're touching. I don't think there's any torque settings on these. There might be, but it's only it's basically take it down, so that's a spring pushing it up, take it down, nipped. Do this with the 4 screws, but nipped, and then it really only needs, don't forget these are aluminium, screws are metal. If you're doing too tight, it'll strip the thread, and just give it a little nick like that, just to tight. Put the other 2 on. That's it. I showed you how to clean the jets with a piece of solder or using oxyacetylene nozzles and stuff like that, but I finally got these in. These are, I can show you, these are proper carburetor jet cleaners, all different sizes. So you've got explanation of constant vacuum carburetor. I noticed someone on YouTube's got constant velocity. I'm sure that's not right. If I am wrong, I do apologise, but I'm sure it's constant vacuum. Constant velocity joints on drive shafts. There is a link to a great animation which will be coming across the bottom of the page, I think, or it'll be coming up on this little clip of the video, which shows you exactly how a CV carburetor works. I don't know who the guy is. I just found it on YouTube, and it explains it so well, with a bike running and everything, and all the animation of the fuel running through and the air and everything else. Really good to look at. It explains everything in like 2 minutes, where I would mostly explain it in an hour. So have a look at that, because it's really good. I'm not sure how to embed it. I'll just put the link underneath and you can write it down, maybe. Okay, that's that. So I thought I'd show you the parts in the jets and the float and the needle and everything. So I've taken the float out. There's a little pin here. Little pin that you just tap out. That slides back in. Before the needle, the float needle valve, which is this little chappy here, there's a little wire over the top of it that sits over the float, so that it actually hangs like so. When it's inside, so the float goes up and down, and the needle valve goes up and down with it. There is another part of the needle valve bed, I suppose you could call it. When you buy a new needle, you get the needle, the rubber, and the gasket, which is there. You can buy a bigger kit which has the float in, bigger kit again which has the jets in. It just depends on what you actually need. So basically there's a little screw here which sits, and a plate that actually holds that bed in place. And this screws into here. That stops the in there. You take your float. You can check these by putting them into a container, a beaker or a jar of some form or other. Put some fuel in and sit it inside. These are just full of air, these bowls. If there's a pinhole in there, sometimes you get where the fuel will just keep on leaking out the back of the carbs, and if that's the case, then normally the floats aren't shutting off, or there's a lot of crap on the valve itself, on the little valve. These are okay. I had a sticky one when I first got the bike here, but I cleaned it up and they've been fine, so I'm not going to replace them. I just thought I'd show you the new parts. I'm not going to replace them for now. If there's a pinhole in this, if you put it into the fuel and it starts, you know, sinking a little bit rather than just floating, the chances are there's a pinhole in the float, and that will end up filling up with a bit of fuel and will never ever shut the valve off properly to stop once the float bowl has got its allocated amount of fuel in that it needs. So basically all you do is that gets dropped onto there, you pop that back in there and then just push that into place. Sometimes it needs a little bit of persuasion. The pin can't come out because it's got a sort of it's slightly wider on this side, so it just goes up to the edge of the casting, and it's through the other side. As long as it meets up to the end, that's fine. And if you can see the actual float, the little wire which is over the top is now sat on there, and when the float goes up and down, it lifts the valve, lets the fuel in. Once the amount is in that it needs to do, this lifts up and it'll shut off. Remember, this is upside down at the moment, so that's that. And then you need to put your gasket on, your new gasket. Then we have your main jet. Which sits in here. Washer goes in. Main jet screws in. Then you have a pilot jet, which is this one. I've got a couple of little pictures that I can put up with these anyway as well. Pilot jet lives down there. Just has to be nipped up, doesn't have to be ridiculously tight. Bear in mind, this is just, you know, normally steel screwdrivers, they're brass. So if you really go over the top with it, you can end up damaging the brass. You end up getting bits down into the jet. You can end up breaking a little bit of the brass up. You might not be able to get out properly, then you'll have to drill them out, and it's all can all go a bit wrong. Pilot jet air screw. Leave that there where you can see that. A bit tiny. And this lives in there. Use this one, slightly bigger, and that screws down into there. We did get the other two float bowls, the new ones. And there will be, I'm going to put a little link up to the guy we got these off over in the States, because because he's got a lot of carburettor parts for a lot of bikes, and he's not dear. He's not dear. Postage and everything, even from the States, wasn't a lot. It was like £16 for whatever he posts out. I'll put that link on the site as well. Float bowl, once the gasket's on, shouldn't need any liquid gasket or anything like that. The gasket should do things, and then drop your Allen bolts back in. Remember, same as the diaphragms, they only need to be nipped. That's it. Aluminium casing, steel bolts. Always a recipe for disaster, but that's the way motorbikes are. You can end up stripping the aluminium threads. Back into this one. Not least, and just make sure that the tiny little amount of pressure, and there you have it. So I hope that's given you some information about carburetors on the XS anyway. There'll be more information as we get going through this build, and I don't know what we'll be doing next. I think it's basically just going to be carburetors back on the bike. We'll get some fuel in so we can get them back and get them fired up and just get the bike ticking over, rather than it sort of just working off the choke and off the throttle. And then I'll be happy, and then we can start taking the engine out and looking at that. Okay, cheers.